So hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Edwards with Teshley Solutions, and this is part of our Focus on Special Education segments. Joining me today is Seline D'Agostino, a longtime special education teacher in the Jersey City Public Schools here in New Jersey. And she also happens to be a special education parent. So she has seen it from both perspectives. So she'll be able to share a lot with you this evening. She has her master's degree. Help me out here, Seline. Your master's is in?
Literacy.
In
literacy.
literacy.
So I have a master's in literacy from Grand Canyon, and my undergrad is teacher of the handicap special education.
Okay, and most of your experience is in Jersey City Public Schools, right?
Correct. I got hired right from student teaching.
Hey, if that works, that's awesome. Okay, so I do have some questions that were taken in earlier before we started, but and you are certified in kindergarten through 8th grade, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So I am going to ask you to start with, because I know this is an area that some parents have some trouble distinguishing in the types of special education and the services available. And I know we talked earlier, so if you can explain the difference between an IEP, an individualized education plan, and the 504 accommodations that are allowed for. And just for anyone who is joining and viewing this from out of state, a lot of what will be discussed here tonight has to do with federal regulations that are mandatory across the country. The implementation of those varies a little bit from state to state. So we will, in those instances, be speaking about what happens here in New Jersey. But if you have any questions about what is happening in your state, you should contact your state Department of Education for clarification. Most have on their websites what is on the books for that particular state. So again, Seline, if you could just go over a 504 and the differences between an IEP and a 504.
Of course. Thank you for having me here today. So basically, while both the 504 plans and the individualized education programs are available to students and they are mandated by the federal government, they have differences. So a student who's struggling in school can be eligible for either a 504 or an IEP, depending on what the disability is. A 504 plan is supported, they differ in that one is more civil rights and one is more special education services. The 504 will be an accommodation plan. And what that means is that it can be, for example, it could be also temporary or permanent. A student who has that breaks a leg and has to have a 504 plan has to have the accommodation of either using the elevator or, different seating, or can't, go to gym. So he has to go to a different placement. So they provide accommodations for that student for the time period that he is incapacitated. Or it can be something like a peanut allergy, where the student that has a peanut allergy has to have a 504 to sit at a different table. So most 504 plans are, the students are determined eligible if they have a medical prescription that is given to the guidance counselor. And the 504 plan comes from the Rehabilitation Act, which is it's a civil rights program through the federal government. And because it's federal funding, the student has to have it if the doctor says they need to have this 504 plan. It can be written by the guidance counselor and then supported by the teacher. An IEP differs in that an IEP will classify a student based on their disabilities, and based on the classification, they will have special services that are determined. And the services can range anything from speech language services, occupational services, physical therapy. One or all of these things can encompass an IEP plan. An IEP program will consist of goals that are presented for the student, and they typically are written out for a year, where then they reassess with the team. But we'll get more into that later. But the difference between the 504 plan and the IEP is that the 504 is accommodation based, and to determine the eligibility for it is a medical prescription, whereas an IEP, it's a process where you have to, the child is recommended either by the parent or a school member. They go through data collection with an INRS or RTI process, which is typically about 60 days, where they collect data, make a determination if the student is eligible to be tested. Then he gets seen by the child study team, who will then assess the case and then determine eligibility to create an IEP for the student. And at that point, once they receive an IEP, they are a special education student. And very important to note, and most people don't realize, you can have an IEP and a 504. Like I said, a student who might have a peanut allergy would have a 504 for the peanut allergy, but you cannot have a student that has a special ed student can have a 504, but a 504 student who has a 504 is not necessarily a special ed student.
Okay, if you could just, before we get too far ahead, you used two acronyms earlier that maybe not everyone is familiar with. So if you could just distinguish between the two of those.
So the acronyms were
RNI and
INRS, and yeah, there's a lot of acronyms in special education. So INRS is in need of referral and intervention services, and RTI is response to intervention, and those are typically the teams. So each school, just like you mentioned earlier, that we're going to be focusing on New Jersey, even within New Jersey, each school district runs it differently. For example, as you mentioned, I'm a parent of two children that have IEPs in TNEC, whereas I work in Jersey City. In Jersey City, when a student is being looked at to see if they are eligible for IEPs, the team that dedicates themselves to that is called INRS, which is I and then the ampersand RS. I'm sorry, and RS, which is intervention and remediation services. And RTI is what TNEC uses, which is response to intervention. And typically that team is made up of the guidance counselor, the teacher, a parent, and they create the team that observes the child for the 60 days, collects data, and then decides if the student is eligible for to then go further in the process to be evaluated.
Okay, awesome. Now, let me ask you this, because this was a question that had come in. If a student doesn't necessarily need any type of services, speech or language or anything like that, and they normally perform well in class, however, they might need more time to take a test, to complete that test to the maximum of their ability. Which category would that fall into?
So at that point, you would have to assess, each case is different, but you would have to assess what is causing the child to need more time. I've had students that have test anxiety, where they almost freeze when they get a test, and they do well in class, but for tests, they need that extra time. And if it's caused by test anxiety, at that point, you can have a doctor say that they have anxiety, and they write the prescription, and you provide the accommodation, because extended time for testing is an accommodation. Okay. The difference between an accommodation and a modification is that an accommodation is something that you can do to make it more accessible. For example, extra time, preferential seating, different materials like maybe larger prints. Whereas a modification is how you are changing what is being learned. In other words, a student that maybe instead of memorizing 20 multiplication tables will only have to memorize 5, and that is a modification. So a 504 will only provide accommodations. So extended time would be an accommodation. If the student is struggling with more than just needing the extended time, if they can get the material and they just need the extended time, I would imagine that a 504 would be better suited for that individual child because they can learn the material. They just need the extra time.
Okay. All right, great. And this is a question that comes up a lot. And I know it causes some parents to hesitate with having their children evaluated. So before we get to the procedural steps of what's needed, is an IEP forever?
No, an IEP is not forever. Also, even if you think that you're on the fence and you're like, maybe they need it, maybe they don't. Uh, First of all, it's a team that looks at the child. It is not just one person. It's not the guidance counselor. It's not the teacher. It's not the parent. It's everyone coming together and saying, these are the difficulties that we're noting. If a child has difficulty and they may or may not be eligible, I've advocated for family members and friends to get their child evaluated and then they were not eligible. And that happens often as well. But a hesitation is, if I have my child evaluated, this is going to be with them forever. It is not forever. These cases, once your child is determined to be eligible, you will meet, and a parent is an integral part of the IEP team. And I always advocate for my parents to please come be part of it, ask questions. But you will meet with the team, which is composed of the guidance counselor, social worker, teachers, sometimes the principal, sometimes not, depending on how many people are on the team, and the parents. You meet once a year, and that's called your anniversary date. So if the child was determined to be eligible, let's say September 7th, as an example, every September 7th will be their anniversary date. Once the child starts meeting their goals and the need is no longer met, the goals are predetermined. So they say the child will get 80% of his multiplication tables in 1 year. If he or she is meeting all of their goals, then the team might come to the parent and say, they're meeting the goals, we're going to transition them back. In my district, we like to transition them back slowly. For example, if they're being pulled out, because once you have an IEP, the services that are provided are based on what the child's discrepancies are. So if a child needs a lot of help, they will be placed in a self-contained classroom where it's a smaller setting. They're with one teacher and maybe 7 to 10 students, and the teacher gives them more attention. Once a child starts meeting the goals, they can then move into an inclusion setting, which is with the general education and special education students together in an inclusive environment. The child is learning along with his with all his peers, but will maybe get pulled out for math and go into a smaller group setting for math. Then when he starts meeting his goals there, they'll put him into full inclusion. And then from there, if he no longer needs the services on the anniversary date, or if the parent requests a meeting ahead of time, if I'm noticing 3 months into the school year, hey, he's doing great, something clicked, he no longer needs this, I can request a meeting. They have 30 days to respond. They will typically meet with you, and if they see what you're seeing and the data proves that they're doing well, then the child will just move into a general category. But the IEP is not a forever thing. And I also want to make a note that it's important to know that your degree, once they finish high school, that will not say high school diploma and then it says childhood IEP. There is no distinction anywhere. You'll get the same diploma. There's nothing, in the records as he moves from school to school while they're in their academic career, it's in there to support the next school to show that he needs these accommodations and modifications, but there is nothing on your degree. You don't put it on your application. It's not something that, is forever.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for clarifying that. And actually, in that you addressed one of the other points about the differences in the classroom, the self-contained, the inclusion, and the mainstream. So you covered that.
But it is important to know,
Um,
parents, you have an integral voice, and, you know, become partners. Let them know that, you're following along, be involved. It makes a big difference. As a teacher, the students that make the most progress are when the parents are very involved in the process, communicating with the teacher, communicating with the child study team. How is this advocate for the children?
okay. Now, yeah, that's great, and of course, it makes perfect sense. The more involvement, the better. In the case where you have the team and you have all of these players, and just as any part of life, not everybody always sees eye to eye. So when the parent is in one place and one or more members of the child study team are in another place, how does that get resolved? Whether it's the parent that thinks the child is doing better and the people in the district may not, or it could be vice versa. I've seen it both ways. So if you could explain how that gets resolved, that would be great.
Absolutely. So with the if, for example, a parent says my child is doing better and is no longer in need of pull-out services. So when I explained the differences before, self-contained is a small group setting, teacher, small group of students. Inclusion with pull-out services is where it's an inclusion classroom, but they get pulled out for either reading or math, depending on what their area of weakness is. And then the full inclusion where they have two teachers working. I didn't mention that, two teachers working together. So it's a special ed teacher and a regular ed teacher, and they work together as a team to provide the services within the classroom. So if I'm a parent and I notice my child is doing well, and I want them to no longer get the pull-out services, I want them included with, the whole group. I write a letter, say I see an improvement in my child. They will then, as a parent, look for the evidence saying, these tests he scored well or she scored well. I would like to move them into the whole group. The school will make a recommendation, but ultimately the parents have the final say. If a parent says, I no longer, you have the right also as a parent to say, I no longer want the IEP for my child. Um, if if it is warranted, um, the school will not argue with you, but if the school really feels that this child can benefit, they will put pressure on, but ultimately the parent makes the decision. If you go through the whole process and the school determines that there is, a reason for special ed services, and the parent no longer wants the special ed services, you have that right to pull them from the special ed services. Then you have the opposite side where a parent says, I want the special ed services, I want them to be classified. And the school says, we've looked at the data, they don't qualify to even be evaluated. And I have seen that circumstance both personally and professionally, where a parent says, my child is struggling, my child doesn't pay attention. And they say, they're fine, they're fine, they're fine. We can't, we have too many cases. We can't we can't evaluate him right now. At that point, the parent, if they believe that the child can benefit from special ed services and the school does not evaluate based on their data, the parent does have the option to go through their insurance and go to a neurologist and get private testing done. Once the private tests determine that the child is eligible, the school cannot deny it. However, that process is costly and time consuming. I believe during the pandemic, it used to be where it would be, but in New Jersey, about a 1-year waiting list for the neurologist. And I believe throughout COVID and even now, the waiting lists are about a year to a year and a half, if not slightly more. But again, that process is costly, time consuming. And then you have the scenario where you also have the right to go to the Board of Ed and ask for compensation for your expenses, but that normally lends into litigation.
Right. And yeah, that was going to be one of my questions to you, um, as a special education teacher, if you had seen an increase, because we know how disruptive these last couple of years have been for everyone,
Yes.
but particularly for students. You know, some of whom thrived in the online environment to the total shock of their parents. Um, but that's not, I have heard of those stories and I've personally known people, but that's not the majority of parents and students. Some managed to tread water and then others did not. So there has been an increase. From what you're telling me is that there has been an increase since the pandemic started.
And the pandemic has caused a big discrepancy. This past year, I was actually teaching first grade, and it is almost sad and frustrating as a teacher because we had students that had the pandemic affected them. The first graders specifically that I taught had been pulled out of the preschool program in March. So now you have these, children that were going into the preschool program, were getting the basics, how to sit in the seat, how to do the ABCs, how to, make their sounds, how to look at words and know that print goes from left to right. And, these children were pulled out in March, then put in front of a computer. Many times, a lot of them didn't have the resources, weren't able to sit, had working parents, had, inefficient technology. And then the outcome was they now started in September as first graders this past school year. And at that point, don't know letters, don't know numbers, can't read. And it was very sad. Now I do work in an urban setting, where it becomes it was more challenging for a lot of the students in that, within that population. But um the truth of the reality is there was much more discrepancy. And in a typical year, given any classroom, you might recommend 3 or 4 students for, to be, seen or to be evaluated. And in this past year, in the first grade class, we had 21 students and we had 9 evaluated and 7 were determined eligible. So it is very sad. And we were very intense in our programming and, providing many modifications and accommodations for students that were not even classified, just to give them that support. I also would like to mention, most teachers will modify, the truth of the reality is most teachers will modify and provide accommodations when it's needed, whether a child has an IEP or a 504 or doesn't. However, as a parent, the advantage is that when you fight for and get an IEP for your student, for your child, that student has the right, and it is a legal document. Therefore, you get those services because it is federally mandated. If the school is not in compliance with providing what was agreed upon, they can lose their federal funding. So it gives an edge to the parents to ensure that that child is getting what they need, which
Right.
is the importance of the IEP. So for parents who may be on the fence and saying, I don't know, this is why the IEP is important, because you are guaranteed by law. There have been cases where, a child needs special services, for example. Oh, and when you mentioned about whether it's permanent, I know of a very close friend of mine. Her child had apraxia, which was a speech delay. He had an IEP, he got speech services. They actually ended up suing the district because the speech therapist left midway. They didn't get the services they wanted. She was able to get the speech services privately in the time that they were hiring the speech therapist. And that child only had an IEP for 2 years, and now he's a general ed student. So the IEP for him was for 2 years. It was just the time that he needed just to to meet the mark.
Right. And at some point in the future, for those that are listening, we will have an attorney on to go more in depth about what your rights are, particularly in cases where you believe or you know that the school district is not following the IEP, and your child is not being provided the services that they need. So that's good. So just in general, as a teacher, just to help parents, the transitioning from the different levels of school, whether a child has an IEP, has a 504 or not. I think those of us of a certain age kind of recognize that school's a little bit different now than it was when we walked the hallways. What can parents do, to help and support their children as they make these transitions from, again, every school district's different. So some go K through 4, whereas others go 1 through 6. But as they're making that transition from that one seemingly little building to what in most cases is a much larger building.
So in the primary grades, the IEP and the 504 are easier to implement and support because it's only the one classroom. Sometimes there's 2 classrooms if they end up what they call, switching classes, where they might be having 2 teachers, one for math, one for language arts, but it's that those classes stay pretty much contained within, 2 teachers. Once they go into middle school, you have multiple teachers, multiple special education teachers, and multiple specialists. And accommodations and modifications also go for the specials. So when you have a Spanish class, the same modifications that are given through language arts and math, if the IEP says that child must get study guides, the Spanish teacher is not exempt from that. Just because it's a special does not, exempt the specialist from providing the same modifications and accommodations. But it becomes much more difficult in middle school and then in high school. I would say in the primary school, it's all about being in very good communication with the teacher or teachers. Once you go into middle school and you have multiple teachers, there is something that's going to be called a teacher of record. Okay. And the teacher of record is who is responsible to ensure that your child is receiving all the services. So at that point, for myself, I have a middle schooler myself, and because that transition was very hard and very nerve-wracking for me as a mom, because now he has multiple teachers, multiple special education teachers, and I didn't know every teacher has a different style. So I really had to see and personality, how he struggled or what his strengths were within each class. Then I got to know his teacher of record, which is who is responsible for implementing the IEP and letting the other teachers know this is what their modifications are, this is what their accommodations are, and they're the ones that you communicate with frequently. In middle school, I would suggest that you really teach your child to self-advocate. And that in high school, they should be able to advocate for themselves, know that they have an IEP, know what their modifications and accommodations are, and advocate as needed. The tricky part comes in knowing when the child, I always like to put a margin, and they have to reach the line, and then, that threshold where like they're just getting it, just push it just slightly up. Always have it be challenging, because you don't want to, if a child gets study guides and they're doing well with the study guides, and then you notice that there's a lot of improvement, push back and then maybe ask for a study guide without the answers, that just the questions, and they would have to look for the answers. And always keep them challenged and always current, because it's not a crutch, it's an aid. So you always want to make sure that the child is getting exactly what they need, and you monitor as a parent to do that. But my middle schooler, if he says, the teacher goes really fast, and I get the notes, but I can't figure out the notes and what she's saying, and I forget things before when she starts talking more, and then by the time she gives me the study guide, I forgot a lot of it. So I said, what do you think will help? Let them, at that point when they're 11, 12 years old, depending again on your district, but most middle school starts 10, 11, 12, have them, reflect and say, if I had this, it could help me. So my son came to me and said, Mom, if I had the notes before the class started, or if I had the study guide before the class started, I can look at it, listen to her, and then write anything that extra that I think I don't want to forget. So I said, okay, great. And then he said, write an email, Mom. And I said, oh no, you're going to talk to your teacher. And it was a hard conversation for him. And I wrote the email, but he didn't know I wrote the email. So I supported my child, but you do teach them to advocate because they do need to learn. Once they're in high school, it becomes very difficult to monitor and technology, does lend to being able to monitor a lot closer. In TNEC, we have something called Skyview or some online portal. Every district will have an online portal. We have an online portal in my district called Infinite Campus. Each district has their own, but most grades are online now. There's apps that you can log into. You can log in through your email, and it'll give you your child's grades. And Google Classroom is great if the teacher uses that, or any platform the teacher uses, to know what the materials that they're learning are. Become very familiar with that, because then it'll help you support your child as well. But definitely for the transitions, I would definitely say teach them as they get older to advocate and support them just enough, but let them become more independent and not rely so much on the parent to solve the problems. Have them solve their problems as well, and learn their teaching styles. They have to learn what helps them.
Right. And as you talked about different teaching styles, and then also different personalities, that to me, that's one of the additional benefits of going to school, is because you're learning well, okay, we don't really use textbooks anymore that much, but whatever you're learning, the whether it's technology or textbooks, but it's those interpersonal skills that you learn. You learn not only how to navigate around and negotiate with your classmates, but yes, you realize that this one teacher is very soft and gentle, and that this other teacher, you don't ever want to get on that person's bad side. And everybody knows it, and it usually goes through the school building pretty fast, because I remember when my daughter was young, she used to tell her friends who were a year or two behind her, oh, you have her for a teacher? Yes, she's no joke. You better be straight. So that, yeah, having them advocate for themselves not only builds their confidence, but then, because how they advocate with teacher A is probably going to be a little bit different than how they're going to advocate with teacher B. And then they will continue to build those skills as they get older, so that when they get into the workforce, they've pretty much mastered that. So,
Exactly.
I love that you support that. And again, a child advocating for themselves does not mean a child being disrespectful. They can do it in, some people say, well, they can't go up against it. Well, no, this isn't a shouting match, but they can say, hey, how about this? Which, let me ask you something. In the example that you gave, that sometimes the teacher goes fast, are there any rules, particularly since with the phones having so many capabilities now, what is are there any rules, laws, regulations for later?
You froze for a moment. Can you just repeat the question? Are there any rules with the phones? And then I didn't hear the rest of it.
I'm sorry, with being allowed to record
Okay, so for a
class.
child to be allowed to record a class, it in my district, because of privacy, and because of the other students, because there are permissions in place. For example, you have to have photo permission, video permission. As a teacher, I can't take pictures or record a child unless I have a written consent from the parent. So to allow other students, do they have the phones? Absolutely. Are they allowed to use them? Technically not. Again, I'm grammar school, but my daughter is in the high school, and their phones are controlled. They're not allowed to have them out in the open. The kids go on them. The teachers know they go on them. But as far as recording, unless it is written in their IEP, it is uh, not typical. In lieu of recording, because of the privacy, most teachers will provide, like I said, the study guides, or many teachers have gone as far as to send me the Google Slides. A lot of them work on Google Slides where they create online presentations. I myself have used that with first grade. You'd be surprised how responsive they are to these Google Slides. And it makes it more interactive and engaging. So videos, Google Slides, all of that will be provided for the student in lieu of recording. Again, there are special circumstances that the child will be allowed, but it has to be written in the IEP in order to, to protect that child as well as the other children. Another note also in enabling students to advocate for themselves, especially as they start to go into the middle school. For teachers and parents, I'm going to be very honest, presume competence. Many times myself as a parent who was a special educator before she became a parent, I would say, no, that's too hard. I don't think that they can do that. And I'm just going to do it for them. And I myself am guilty of not presuming competence. And I feel that, maybe it's a protective mechanism in my part. And sometimes as a teacher, you create certain scenarios like where you've had 2 or 3 siblings of that one child, and then you're like, oh yeah, they don't like to study, and that child might be a person who studies. So presume competence, assume that the child can do it. In going back to advocating and advocating not just for their social, their academic needs, social needs as well. I have a very good friend of my son's who I don't want to say what disability they have, but they have a disability where there's a lot of stigma with this one particular child, and the child advocated for themselves for a social situation and went to the administration of the building and said, I want to see this happen. It was a social event. I want to see it was a sporting event. And she said, I want to do this, students against faculty. And administration was, who gave you the idea? She goes, no, I just want to see it. And they did it. So, helping them. And a lot of times people didn't assume that, that they were capable of doing these things. And it's important to let them know that they have a voice and hear them out.
Right, absolutely. Okay, I really appreciate you being here. I really value your time. So for those who believe or suspect that their child might need some kind of accommodations or modifications, whatever it is, in here in New Jersey, what are the procedures that they need to follow? And then just to clarify, is it always the parent that initiates the process? So if you want to take those together or separately, you can. It's whichever way you want to do it, it's fine.
Okay. So for if you believe that your child may or may not need accommodations or modifications, if a child has a medical diagnosis, anxiety, a medical condition that will prevent them from seeing the board clearly, if it's just accommodations based and it's based on a medical condition, get the doctor's prescription, go into the school. The 504 plan is basic, it's simple, it'll just list out whatever accommodations are needed, and that's done with the guidance counselor. That's a simple process if all they need is accommodations. And a student that has a 504 is not a special education child, it's just a child that needs accommodations. That's a simple process. If you feel that your child needs more services and modifications or changing of, they can't learn all the content, or it's extensive and they need to learn, a child that might have communication impairment, a speech delay, a learning disability, dyslexia, those are more comprehensive. And then I would, as a parent, you can write a letter. The letter will then be given to the INRS team. They'll go ahead and start they'll create, 2 or 3 goals in each subject area. They'll give themselves a time window. Typically it's 60 days. Each school is different, but either the INRS team that we talked about earlier or the RTI team, they will look at this child. They will meet, the teachers will meet together. At that point, it's just the teachers. Sometimes they invite the nurse to come into that meeting in case the nurse can look and say, okay, maybe this is, if it's the visual, we'll put them closer to the board, and they decide on how to create a scenario where the student will be successful. They'll give goals and they'll recommend certain modifications that will be implemented on a trial basis. Then they're going to meet 60 days later and see if any progress was made. If progress was made, they will provide those modifications, accommodations. But if the child is still struggling, at that point, they will call the parent in and they will have what's called a consent meeting. During the consent meeting, they'll say, we follow the child for 60 days during the RTI or INRS process, and the child still struggled and needed extra services. At that point, they'll say, do you consent to testing? The child will go through an IQ test, psychological test, that the social worker will do an interview with the parents, and they'll do this testing process, which typically takes about 2 months. And then they'll call the parent in and say, your child was found eligible. This is the determination, the classification, and these are what we can provide. Or they'll say the child is not eligible. And at that point, they'll say, we'll continue to support them in any way we can. They're not eligible because there has to be a discrepancy. And typically the discrepancy is 2 years or more below grade level in order for them to classify under one of the classifications. And it could be something like common classifications are speech delays, autistic spectrum. They change the names of the classifications a lot of times, but learning disability, or they'll say OHI, which is other health impaired, which could be, dyslexia sometimes is put in as OHI. It depends on the school district again. But if the child meets the classification, then they have the IEP. That's when you do the initial IEP. Everyone sits down, they sign. If you agree or don't agree, during that process, there can be back and forth. Sometimes they meet as soon as during the meeting, they'll say, these are the goals that we have. These are our ideas. If the parent agrees with it, they sign off. If the parent says, no, I want more speech services, instead of getting speech services once a week, I want it twice a week. Then at that point, they agree to meet at a later time. But until all the parties involved are happy, then you sign off on it. That's your anniversary date. And then you meet every year, unless there's a change. Myself, my child was doing very well during the online, and I actually asked for a meeting ahead of time. And my child was then brought back into the general ed classroom during that process.
Okay, so let me ask you this now, because you were speaking earlier about, going outside. So if a child is determined by the district to be ineligible, do the parents have any recourse? Can they get, as when you get a diagnosis from your doctor and you want a second opinion, what is the recourse if they still truly believe that the district, not out of malice or anything, but just somehow missed something with their child? What would be the next step there if they're determined to be ineligible?
If a child is found ineligible by the child study team and they say, according to our test, the child is not eligible, the parents can go to a neurologist, get their own testing done privately, come back with the documentation, at which point the school has to provide the services. Now, what services are going to be provided, again, have to be negotiated, for lack of a better word, but you do have to request certain interventions and say, I would like these services. the school can or cannot. I've had school districts this current year. My school district is actually revamping our school and our personnel. Give me one moment. I apologize.
No, that's fine. We're almost done. I know we ran a little over because of tech issues, so I understand.
I'm sorry. I'm like, they just walked in. The play date to the park was a little cut short. So if the parents don't agree with the child study team on what services are needed, then at that point you would go into litigation and say the school district has to provide me for, speech services. My child has a communication delay. They don't want to provide the speech services. But as I was getting to before, many school districts, our school district, based on staffing, because COVID has caused a staffing issue, we no longer have pull-out math offered in our school. So now the special education teachers are actually going from room to room and providing in-class support rather than pull-out support. And that's not something that's typical. Some of our parents are highly upset, which is understandable. As a parent myself, I would also be concerned, but there is something in place and it's affecting it, like I said, district-wide. However, at that point, if it's not offered and the program that you need is not offered and you can prove that it's not offered, many times the school districts have to provide an out of district placement. That's when you get into out of district placements, or they have to provide services that will be coming into the school, or that the parent can take the child to after school.
Okay, great. So I'm going to get ready to wrap this up because again, I know we got a bit delayed because of technical issues. So I'm just going to ask you to close off with your best piece of advice as both a special education teacher and parent, for those watching and listening, how they can, because I'm big on advocacy. So I know you talked about allowing the child to advocate for themselves, but and sometimes the adult has to do it. So what's your best advice for parents?
I advocate, be involved, communicate. I also, if you are unsure, create a diary or a journal, or just, a scrap of papers that where you note things, different things, struggled with this test, needed things that help and don't help, because sometimes we forget. Like, I'm like, wait, last month we did something and what was it? So take a small book and just say, struggled in school, didn't sleep well, did great with, study guides, highlighting helped him remember or her remember. Create notes for yourself, because you will forget. And those notes will actually help you advocate. Because you could say, I've noticed that when we use this, it helps him. When these things were happening, this supported him. So create notes so that you can open the lines of communication, have a great relationship with your teachers, work in partnership with the teachers. Don't, if you don't like something that's going on in the classroom, if you think that the teacher talks too fast, sometimes if you just request them, like, okay, my child has a hard time hearing, can you talk a little slower? I talk very quickly. And I've had to learn how to pace myself, because the truth of the reality is not everyone processes at the same time. So I've had to learn how to slow down. But I've had parents say, can you just, and I said, I will try my best. And if I can't, I will create, something to help them or support them. So open that dialogue, create that bridge. This is not meant to be an adversary process. Many times you will find, especially the teachers, will cooperate with you and will do whatever is needed, because in the long run, we want that child to be successful as well. And, just make it so that it's, it's a process that's going to support your child. So you definitely want to be a positive experience and be involved. That IEP team that I mentioned, a parent is very important there. Your voice is important. You have rights. Oh, and there's a very, very important, the meeting that you have, the consent meeting, they will give you something called the prize. It's Parental Rights in Special Education. Now it is available online, and it tells you all your rights as a parent. I don't read it, but I briefly go through it. So, if you have any questions, there's a lot of questions that are answered. There's a condensed version now. Very, very important. PRISE, PRISE, parental rights and special education. And again, just create that line of communication. Know who to communicate with.
Okay, awesome. Seline, thank you very much for coming out and speaking about special education from both ends, from both perspectives, because that's really, really important. I'm sure the parents have gained some valuable information and insights and guidance. And I thank you very much. And again, for those listening, we will be back with part 2 of Focus on Special Education, dealing specifically with the legal aspects, but then also, as Seline is a K-8 teacher, we will be dealing with what to do when your child is aging out of the system and transitioning out of high school into, either college or trade school or whatever that next phase might look like. So stay tuned and we will be back with that. Thank you again, Seline D'Agostino.
And
You were
thank you for
awesome.
having me.
You're very welcome. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.